Good morning. Today's daf is daf Lamed Daled 34 in Masechah Shevuot. Of course, it's not the Shevuot that we just celebrated. That's Shavuot of weeks. This is about oaths, and we're actually we're in the fourth chapter, and we are actually discussing oaths. We are now discussing oaths associated with testimony. That is, again, also a lot of the oaths are discussed in the fifth chapter of Vayikra, that if you violate them, you have to offer a certain kind of korban. But in any event, the bottom line is that these oaths are associated with somebody going and asking somebody to come to testify on their behalf in court. And we're in the middle of discussing that it needs to be a monetary case, and the court says, and the potential witness says, I don't know anything. And you actually make the witness swear that they don't know anything, and then they go to court and they confirm that oath. So then that they're not going to testify, that they don't know anything, and then of course it becomes clear that they actually do know something, and they did know the testimony, and so they were lying. Then perjury. There's exactly some kind of perjury, effectively. Then they are going to need to offer a special sacrifice associated with that. But the bottom line is that where we are at the moment, in fact, let me share my screen and we'll really get started, is we just finished Brisa, and so I wasn't sure whether we were going to finish the Brisa yesterday, but we did finish the Brisa, and so again, that person, if they violated, needs to bring a korban olav yored, and we've seen that the case must be financial rather than religious, and we concluded yesterday by citing a Brisa, although I wrote on the screen that's so far provided 3 bases for limiting these cases to monetary cases. In the end, yesterday, we actually covered all 4, and so let's go over them. So Rabbi Eliezer said that there was a gzeira shava involving the word or, between the oath of testimony and the oath of deposit. And so we have, again, if I were to come to you and say, listen, I gave you my tefillin to watch, can you please give them back? And you say, I have no idea what you're talking about. You never gave me anything. And then you swear to that. And then it turns out that it wasn't true. So then you will have to offer a special, offer a korban for having lied in connection with that deposit. Hello, Mark. Hello, Lori. Wonderful. Come on in.
Okay.
So
we get the bottles later.
Yeah. The bottles are downstairs in the lobby.
It's not there yet.
Yes. They're there in the closet, in the coat room. In the coat room.
Not there.
Yeah. They're there. We'll find them together. At least I hope they're there, unless somebody else took them. Okay. So we are now in the middle of, again, we're discussing a Brisa that says that when it comes to the oath of testimony, it needs to be in a monetary case. So the Rabbi Eliezer was the first of 4 different explanations as to why it needs to be a monetary case. And that the first answer is that it's because of a gzeira shava involving the word or. As they said, the terminology yesterday was oim. That's a plural for o's. So ors. So the point is that multiple ors, and that's O-R, not O-A-R, multiple ors, one in connection with the oath of testimony, one in connection with the oath of deposit, and just as deposits involve monetary claims, so too the oath of testimony must involve monetary claims. That was Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva said that it was from the word la'achas me'ela, that from one of these. So one of these, meaning it's one of these matters, that's going to be that suggests that not every kind of matter will trigger the korban olav yored in the case of somebody who swears that they don't know the relevant testimony. So what is the one case that will apply? It's going to apply only to monetary cases. So that was approach number 2. Approach number 3 was Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili said the words either saw or knew. meaning who aid o ra'ah o yoda. He was a witness who either saw or knew. Now, what is the kind of matter where it is sufficient to testify to either seeing or knowing, and potentially that's enough for liability? Well, that is not true in a punishment, in a whipping case or a capital case, etc. It is only true in a monetary case. So where's a case where I see but don't know? So if I see Stan give Mark $100,
Yeah.
and Stan says, Mark, can you pay me back the $100 that I gave you? And Mark says, you never gave me anything.
Oh.
Well, that would be bad, right? Because that wouldn't
Yeah,
be
yeah.
true. So then my testimony, even though I have no knowledge of the nature of Stan's payment to Mark, that is sufficient, because Mark's response was, I never borrowed anything from you, and that is not true. It is sufficient to cause Mark to be liable to Stan. And what's the situation where I can know? So that's seeing. I saw the transfer
But you
without
don't know the
knowing, because I
details.
never knew any of the details. Then there's knowing without seeing. And that's a situation where Mark admits to Stan that he borrowed
Right.
the $100, and now says again, oh, I never borrowed anything from you. And so as a result, I can know without seeing. I never saw anything. All I did was hear with my ears, and that's sufficient again for Mark to be liable. So only in a monetary case is there this possibility of either seeing or knowing, and not needing to have both. Okay. And so then again, we ended yesterday with the fourth and the end of the brisa. In the end of the brisa, Rabbi Shimon also says, first he tries a mamatzinu, or a binyanav, and then he tries a kal v'chomer, and then in the end he rejects the binyanav and kal v'chomer, because he tries to say that given the fact that when it comes to a deposit, there's all these different rules that are associated with it. And given the fact that a oath of testimony seems to be stricter, so as a result, if something is something is monetary in connection with the deposit, so certainly it should only be monetary when it comes to the or maybe I guess it's the other way around. When it comes to the deposit is stricter, and so when it comes to the monetary, it can only apply. Excuse me, when it comes to the oath of testimony, it can only apply in monetary cases. But then he rejects that, and in the end, he too says that it's all about a gzera shava, and it's a gzera shava about the word techeta, will sin. That the word will sin is used both in connection with the oath of testimony and the oath of deposit. And so now we're going to go through each of those four explanations, and that's going to be our day today. We're going to go through each of those four explanations in detail. We're going to start with item number 2 on the screen, because we did already item number 1 yesterday. And we're going to start with item number 2 on the screen and go through each of them. So maskif lo Rabba bar Ula. So and this is see 1, 2. Where is it? Here it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines down. Third word from the end of the line, maskif lo Rabba. Maskif lo Rabba bar Ula. So Rabba bar Ula asked the following question. Bitu yochichu. 1 second. So again, remember that the first explanation, right, all the way at the top, Rabbi Eliezer said that it's based on a gzera shava of the word O, but there is an O that is used in connection with Shevuot bitui. That's the oath that we've been studying in the 3rd chapter. That's the oath where you say, I will do this, I won't do this, I did do this, I didn't do this. right? And you swear falsely in that situation. Shehain Owen, there's an O there as well. V'yeshiman shvua, and there is an oath that one needs to make in that situation, or that one is making in this situation. But Animon Cohen, and there's no problem. We preferred to learn what the Gemara has already addressed. Why don't we learn from Sota, which is this week's Torah portion? Why don't we learn from Sota that because that there also the woman makes an oath, but there's a Kohen involved, and so as a result, it's better to learn from the O where there's no Kohen involved than the O where there is. But the O that's in Shuas Bitui also doesn't involve a Kohen. Umedabrim shelo b'tvias mamon, and over there, remember the oath of I am going to do something, I'm not going to do something, I did something, I didn't do something. Does it have to do with money? No, it does not have to be with money. It could be any kind of subject. And so as a result, maybe we should learn from Shavuos Bitoy that any subject that you're subject to testimony should apply the oath of testimony. No, Mistabra, it makes more sense. Mi pikadon lahava le'lameif. That makes more sense to learn it from the deposit. Shekain techata mitechata, because both of them involve sin. And so as a result, there's essentially two words that are common between them. Well, adarabba, mibitoy havalei lameif. Well, I can give you a reason why it makes more sense to learn Shvuas Edus from Shvuas Bitoy than it does from Shvuas Bikadon, because shekain chatas michatas. When it comes to Shvuas Bitoy and Shvuas Ha'edus, both of them are a korban olav yored. So it makes sense to learn one from the other. But when it comes to Shvuas HaPikadon, that's not a Shvuas olav yored. That's a more traditional, a korban olav yored. And it's a more traditional korban chatas. So Ella mistabra mi pikadon havalei lamelav shekain chet. Well, 1 second. I can tell you that it makes more sense to learn from deposit because one, we have both sin, bemazed. Both of them are subject to the offering, even if you make the oath falsely on purpose. Remember, if you say Shuas Habitui on purpose, you're just going to get lashes. You don't have to give the korban olav yored. Tave l'chafrei. Also, when you compare a Shvuas Hapikadon with Shvuas Ha'edus, in both situations, the other party, another person's involved, and he's asking you for something. Yeah. He's telling you, you need to swear for me, or you need to give me back my item. And so, and the other person is rejecting, I don't know the testimony, or I don't have the item. So that only exists in Shvuas Hapikadon and Shvuas Ha'edus. It doesn't exist in Shvuas Bitoy. Shvuas Bitoy is something that one does on their own. The Avrei, and both of them are about the past. And you might say, well, 1 second, we know that Shvuas HaBitui can also be about the past. I did do something, or I didn't do something, but the language in the Chumash is about the future. So the point is that the core element, and this is the words that Rashi says about Bitui Ikra Lahaba, the core element of a Shuas Bitoy is about the future. So as a result, we have 4 bases to connect this Shuas Ha'edus to Shuas HaPikadon. Well, Adarabba, Mibidoy Havalei. I'm now going to give you every reason to connect it to Shuas Bitoy. 1, Shekain Chatas. It's got the same sin offering. Sheyarda. It's a variable offering. L'chomish. And when you do these kinds of oaths, there is no applicability of owing an extra 1/5. If I give you my tefillin, and then you deny having it, well, we'll do it, make it easier. I give you $100, and then you deny having it, and you swear that you didn't have it, and then you know what you say, David, I just didn't want to get it for you, but I did have it. You actually owe me a 20% penalty. 25% penalty, depends on which way you calculate a fifth, but the bottom line is you're going to owe me a penalty. That's not true for either Shvuas Ha'edus, and it's not true for Shvuas Habitui. So, And so as a result, that's something that Shavuos HaEdus has in common with Shvius HaBitoy. So maybe again, that's a reason to connect Bitoy to Edus. No, but Hanach Nefishan, in the end of the day, 4, which is greater, 4 or 3?
4.
4 is greater. And so as a result, there we have 4 reasons to connect it to Shavuos HaPikadon, 3 reasons to connect it to Shavuos HaBitoy, and so we should choose 4 over 3, and so that's why we finally finished our analysis of Rabbi Eliezer, and we're going to say 4 is more than 3, and so everything is okay. So now we turn to challenge and explain Rabbi Akiva's approach. Again, Rabbi Akiva's approach was based on from one of these, achat me'ela. So as a result, I would say that because it means one of these, so it means that one of them is not going to apply. So it's not going to apply in all conditions. And so as a result, it's not going to apply other than in monetary cases. So Rabbi Akiva Omer, now we're going to quote Rabbi Akiva, that because it says that you're going to be guilty in one of these matters, yesh me'ela shehu chayav, there's something matter that where you are liable, but yesh me'ela shehu batar, and there's something where you're not liable. What's the example? Tvo mamon. So if you claim money chayav, so then you'll be liable in the case of a false testimony with an oath with respect to testimony. But tivo davar acher. But if you claim something in a non-monetary case, so then patur, then you'll be exempt. You won't be liable. But epogana, maybe we should say the exact reverse. Maybe it includes non-monetary case and it excludes monetary cases. Meaning, how do I know which way we should take this exclusion? So Rabbi Akiva Owen, the Rabbi Eliezer Samach. No, he also relies on the Gzeira Shav of Rabbi Eliezer, where that fact that the O in connection with Shavuos HaEdus and the fact that it also exists by Shavuos HaPikadon tells us that in fact, just as Pikadon involves a monetary case, so too Shavuos HaEdus must involve a monetary case. So in that case, if Rabbi Akiva is relying on Rabbi Eliezer, my beinayu bein Rabbi Eliezer the Rabbi Akiva, ubein Rabbi Akiva. What's the difference between the two opinions? So ika beinayu, here's the difference. Mashpia ade karka. If I have you swear in connection with land, the Rabbi Eliezer chayavin, the Rabbi Akiva peturin. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, that's still considered a monetary case, and so as a result, we'll include it. The Rabbi Akiva, you're not going to be liable because we know that achas me'ela is going to exclude something. And so what does it exclude? It excludes real estate cases. And so as a result, you're not going to be liable if you swear falsely in connection with testimony about a real estate matter. Rabbi Yochanan de Amar Hasam Mashpia Ede Karka. But 1 second, according to Rabbi Yochanan, he says that in fact we do have witnesses swear in connection with testimony about land, Afil Rabbi Eliezer Peturin, but they're not liable even according to Rabbi Eliezer. So in fact, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it can't be that the difference between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva is Rabbi Eliezer says you're chayiv in connection with real estate, and Rabbi Akiva says you're not, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, even Rabbi Eliezer says you're not chayiv for real estate. So hakamai ika bein Rabbi Eliezer le Rabbi Akiva. What's the difference between them? So ika beinayu ede knas. The difference is what happens if the amount that you owe me is a fine and not a liability, meaning it's not a definitive liability, it's a fine. And so as a result, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you will be liable, again, because he does not add an extra exclusion, where Rabbi Akiva adds an extra exclusion. And so we need to exclude something extra. And so as a result, according to this understanding of Rabbi Yochanan, we'll exclude a case of monetary penalty. Okay, so now we are done with analyzing the second approach, excuse me. That's the approach of Rabbi Akiva. So now we go on to the third approach and analyze Rabbi Yossi Aglili's approach. So again, we quote Rabbi Yossi Aglili as a start. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer v'hu aid o yada. He has to be a witness who either saw or knew. So be'edis hamiskayemes b're'iyah below Yediyah. You have to be able to have testimony that could be accepted as a result of seeing without knowledge, Yediyah below Re'iyah, and knowledge without seeing. Hakasav Medaber. That's what the Torah is telling us about. And so, what kind of cases that is? Monetary cases. So, Amarle Rav Papala Baye Lema Rabbi Yossi Aglili Leislay to Rabbi Acha. Does this show? Maybe this shows the fact that you can use seeing without knowledge and knowledge without seeing only in monetary cases. Maybe that tells us that Rabbi Yossi Aglili disagrees with Rabbi Acha. Well, what did Rabbi Acha say? Well, fortunately, to Tanya, we have the Gemara continues and quotes the Brisa that we learn what Rabbi Acha said. Rabbi Acha Omer Gamal Ha'ocher. If you have a camel in heat, Bein Agamalim, and it is with other camels, and it is going nuts. So then, V'nimsa Gamar Harug Bitzido, and then eventually you find a dead camel next to it. V'yadua Shezeh. So then we can understand that this is the one that killed it. Now, of course, this is a monetary case. Right. But we're going to apply this. Once we say this logic, there's no reason to say that this logic won't apply in a capital case. And the Islay the Rabbi Acha, because if he holds of Rabbi Acha, if Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds of Rabbi Acha, but in the nefashos nami mishkachasla, we should find that you can create the exact same case in a death penalty case. What's the case? Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach. Listen to what happened to Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach. The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach said, I should see consolation. This is a form of oath that he's saying that what he said, what he's about to say, is definitely true and something that happened to him. Im lo ra'isi. If I didn't see, if this isn't true, I should see consolation. So it's really a reverse kind of language on Lush and Sagi Nar. But the bottom line is he's swearing that he saw. Echad sheratz akar chaberu lechorba. He saw Yaakov, we'll use Esav chase Yishmael into a ruins. Okay? Two wicked people, so we don't feel so bad. So Esav chases Yishmael into the ruins. V'ratzti acharav. I ran after them. Umatzasi sayef biyado. I saw a sword in Esav's hands, the chaser's hands. V'dam mitavteit, and blood was dripping from the sword. V'harug mefarper, and Yishmael is there in the throes of death, still, moving around, but is about to die. Amarti lo, and so Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach says to the Esav character in this story, I said to him, Russia, you're a wicked person. Mi haragoza. Who killed this guy? Right? Ani, Ata. Well, there are only two people here, and there's nobody else around. It was either me or you. I know it wasn't me, so that means it was you. But Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach knows that we need witnesses, and so as a result, what can you do? She'ein damcha masur biyadi. Your blood is not delivered to my hands. I'm not two witnesses. I wasn't able to give you the warning in time. You get away. Shaharei amra Torah, because the Torah says al pi shnayim edim o shosha edim yumasmes. You need to have 2 or 3 witnesses, and this is not sufficient. But you know who it would be sufficient for? Rabbi Acha. Because Rabbi Acha says that when you had those camels and and you saw the camels were going crazy, and now all of a sudden you see a dead camel among the camels, you can know, you have good knowledge to know that it was the camel that was in heat that caused the problem. So too, we know it was the Esav character in our story. Ella, but what does Shimon ben Shetach do? He says, Ella hamakom yipara mimcha. Hashem should seek retribution from you. Amru, and it was said about this situation, Lo zazu misham nishacho nachash v'meis. So powerful was the a curse on some level that Rav Shimon ben Shetach put on this guy that a serpent came out of the ruins in which they were found themselves, bit the murderer, and the murderer died. But the bottom line is that in this kind of situation, Rabbi Acha would say We know that the guy was the murderer. That's sufficient. Let's kill him. So afilu tema. So doesn't this show that because what are we saying in connection with Rabbi Yossi Aglili? We're saying that is not enough that is only enough in a monetary case. So it doesn't work in a capital case. So doesn't this show that Rabbi Yossi Aglili doesn't agree with Rabbi Acha? No, it does not show that. Afilu tema islay the Rabbi Acha. We can say actually he does agree with Rabbi Acha. Bishlama yadia below re'iyah mishkachasle, that you're absolutely right that you can have knowledge without seeing. The knowledge without seeing is you walk in right after the murderer walks in and you see the murderer holding the knife, blood dripping, the guy is in his throes, there's nobody else around, there's no other exits, that's sufficient knowledge. But what don't you have? But below remember what Rabbi Yossi Aglili said is that we need to have. Oh, Mark, they could use your help. So we need to have both cases.
So what happens with the bottles that we carry?
Yeah, well, I'll find you afterwards. Okay, but okay. So the point is, maybe I'll bring them upstairs to you.
Okay.
Okay. So so we now have, if we say that Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds like Rabbi Acha, see you later. So that he holds like Rabbi Acha, so as a result, we have a case where there's no seeing, but there is knowledge. But what you can't have in a capital case is seeing without knowledge. Because milo boy meda, the witness needs to know im over kochav ovi kochavim harag o Yisrael hag. He needs to know whether the person who was killed was Jewish or not Jewish.
Wow.
Okay. And so as a result, there's a knowledge that's required. Im adam treifa harag o shalim harag. If the person had some kind of physical ailment that he was going to die very shortly, and therefore is not considered a living person, and so as a result, there's no death penalty in that situation. Tosos asks, how in that world can that be? And suggests that maybe we're dealing with a situation where we have two people, and we know one of them is a treifa and one of them is not, and the murderer kills one of them, and we don't know which one was killed. So the bottom line is that the point is we don't know the answer to that question, and you need to know the answer to that question. So Shema Mina Kasav Rabbi Yossi Mashbia. Okay. So that's the end of that phraseology. So the bottom line is that we see that in fact Rabbi Yossi Aglili could potentially agree with Rabbi Acha. You can't necessarily learn from his statement anything about his position with respect to Rabbi Acha. But Shema Mina, what we can learn is Kasav Rabbi Yossi Aglili Mashbia Edi Knas Patur. But when it comes to causing somebody to swear about testimony that relates to a penalty, then he will be not liable. Because if you say that he's going to be liable, and now we're dealing with, for example, the penalty of a rapist who has to pay the father of the rape victim, depending on the age of the victim. So, or if they seduces the victim. Nehididia below re'iyah ashkachan law, we can again find a case of knowledge without seeing. So again, a woman walks into a cave and she was a virgin, and somebody walks in after her, and afterwards she's not a virgin, and somebody's chasing her and walks in and runs in after her, and now she's not a virgin. So we don't need to have actually seen them have had relations to know that she did not want it and she was now a victim. So that could be knowledge without seeing. So, but re'iyah below yediyah. But can we find seeing without knowledge? You cannot. Because Milo boy Meida Nachris Baal or Bas Yisrael Baal. We need to know whether she's Jewish or not. We need to know Bisula Baal, Beula Baal. We need to know whether she's a virgin or not in order for the liability to kick in. So as a result, there is no way to do that. And so as a result, we learn from Yossi Aglili that in fact this does not work. And therefore, when it comes to Shevuot Ha'edus, it can't be about a knas. Okay. Yosef Rab Hamnuna Kamei de Rab Yehuda. Having now talked about cases of incomplete testimony. So we're going to have a quick aside before we get to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, again, was the fourth of the four explanations in the Brisa that we learned yesterday. So Yosef Rav Hamnuna kamei to Rav Yehuda, but Yosef Rav Yehuda becoming Bele. So Rav Yehuda was, Rav Hamnuna was sitting in front of Rav Yehuda, his teacher, and Rav Yehuda asked him a question. Mana minisicha. If I counted out $100 to you as a loan, bifnei ploni uploni, in front of two people, and maybe we can call this a Daf Yomi coincidence, because yesterday in Megillus Rus, one of the key characters' name is Ploni Almoni, and that's how we get the name Ploni. So v'reidim roim oso mibachutz, and those witnesses only see from the outside. Rashi and Tosfos offer two different explanations from what it means by seeing from the outside. Rashi says that it means that the recipient does not recognize, does not see them, and so as a result has no knowledge about whether or not they're there. And Tosfos says, no, it's not about the fact that the recipient of the money didn't see them. It's about them being outside and therefore not hearing whether the payment of the transfer of money was either a loan or a repayment. And so as a result, if I give $100 to Stan, and Mark and Moshe see that transfer, but then Stan says, "What are you talking about, David? You were paying me back the $100 that I lent you." Huh. So then Moshe and Mark's testimony is useless because they don't know the circumstances. So as a result, so that's the bottom line. So now he's asked that to Rav Hamnuna. So Amar le Rav Hamnuna. So he asked, what's the law? So Amar le Rav Hamnuna says back to him exactly what the law is. He gets it 100% right. V'hala matoin. First, you got to tell me what Stan is claiming. If Stan claims that there was never any kind of transfer, that I never gave him $100, well then huchsa kafran. Then you have been a confirmed liar because you have denied it, but we have witnesses that say it did occur. And Amar in Shakle, but if on the other hand you say, yes, I did take it, Vididi Shakli, but it was my money that I was taking from you. Ki asu edim my havi. Well, then what good are the witnesses? So Amar le, Rav Yehuda says to Rav Hamnuna at ulta. You have done really well. Come, you deserve to be in this Beit Midrash. You should be here. Okay, so Hahu de Amar le lechavre, another similar kind of story. So so mana manisi lecha b'tzad amud zeh. So again, A says that he loaned $100 to B next to this pillar. So Amar lo, and the defendant said back, lo avarti b'tzad amud zeh. I never passed this pillar. Asu trei sade asehidi bei v'dehishtin mayim b'tzad amud zeh. But two witnesses said, no, we saw you urinate at this pillar, right? I mean, this is obviously in days before there was indoor plumbing, so people took advantage of pillars. They were a good place to hide behind to use, and we're talking about an outdoor pillar here. So, Reish Lakish huchsa kafran. In that is enough, according to Reish Lakish, for somebody to be considered a liar. After all, he was in fact by that pillar, and so given that he denied ever even being by the pillar, we're going to say, you know what? You were actually at the pillar, so you're also denying having ever received the money, and therefore, and we know that because you were by the pillar and that wasn't true, so we're going to say that it wasn't true when you say you denied the money, ever getting the money. So Maskif lo Rav Nachman asks on Rav Reish Lakish, hi Dina Parsahu, that's some kind of Persian justice. Mika Amar me Olam, did the person say that he never ever in his entire life passed the pillar? No. When he said he wasn't at that pillar, he means in connection with the money transfer, he wasn't at the pillar. Sure, he urinated at the pillar, but he didn't necessarily take money from the other person at the pillar. So that's one way to understand it. Ikadamri, there are others who say that this following is what actually happened. Hahu da'amr le'lechabre. Again, a person says to his friend, Mana manisi l'chabetzad amudze. I gave you $100 next to this pillar. So Amr Le, and the defendant says back, Lo avarti b'tzad amudze me'olam. I was never, ever, ever in that place. And so as a result, you could not possibly have ever given me $100 next to that pillar because I was never there. And nafku be sahadi dehishtin mayim b'tzad amutzeh. And then it turns out that I bring two witnesses that say that you did urinate at that place. So Rav Nachman hooks now. Rav Nachman, who asked the question in version 1, is now agreeing with Reish Lakish and saying that this person hooks a kapran. That person is an established liar, and because he said he was never ever there, but he really had been there, even though it was only to urinate, that's enough to make him a liar, and that's enough for us to say that he, just as he lied in connection with never being there, he also was lying in connection with never having received the money. So Rava doesn't like it, and we actually follow Rava's view. Amrle Rava le Rav Nachman. Rava says to Rav Nachman, Kol milsa de lo ramya alei de inish avile vilava daite. Anything that's not really important, you know what? People don't necessarily remember. And it's so true, right? The point is that what he was saying when he said, I was never at that pillar, is not, I was never ever at that pillar, and because maybe I did something completely that might not have made any difference in the world, like urinating by that pillar. But I was never at that pillar for something that I needed to remember, namely like a loan or something like that. And that is, in fact, how we seem to paskin. We follow Rava in this situation. Okay, so now we get to the fourth and final explanation of why Shevuos ha'edut is limited to monetary cases. And again, in the end, it was based on a gzeira shava of techta, but we began by saying it was a mamatzinu or a kal vachomer. Now, we are going to, the way the Gemara is going to phrase itself is that apparently let's take a look. Rabbi Shimon Omer chayev kan v'chayev b'bikodon. That just as one is obligated for a false oath here, in the case of an oath of testimony, one's obligated for a false oath in connection with an oath of deposit. And so just as deposit is a monetary case, so too here, the Torah, it's a monetary case. Makaku Allah b'ma'arava. And they mocked the question that Rabbi Shimon said, because Rabbi Shimon then noted that there were two problems with, I'm going to scroll back just to find it, right? There were two problems with the learning it from a kal vachomer and a deposit. One is we do not treat someone who is forced to swear like one who swears on his own, with as the deposit oath doesn't apply when forced to swear, meaning I can't use the language of swear to me, and you say then amen, and that's considered an oath. That doesn't work by deposit, but it does work, and it's a core element of Shevuos ha'edus. So as a result, there's a stricture that's associated with Shevuos ha'edus that doesn't apply to Shevuos ha'bikodon. And also, we do not treat someone who knowingly swears falsely like one who swears unwittingly. And so in connection with in connection with Shevuos ha'edus. And so as a result, that shows that we need to have another basis, and that's why Rabbi Shimon switched to using a gzeira shava. So now, having again noted those two problems, we're going to say, I don't understand what So let's take a look. So macha Allah b'ma'arava. We are at the two dots, lamed daled amabet. So they mocked it in the west. So my chucha, what was the mockery? De katani malaf b'kodon shekain lo asabo mushba kanishba. That when it comes to a deposit, we don't treat somebody who's forced to swear like somebody who swears on their own. And mezid kishogeg. And we don't treat a knowing sinner like an unknowing sinner. So in those two ways, it's less severe than oath of a testimony. So michti, 1 second, mushba mepi atzmo me'edus l'Rebbe Shimon minole. So how does Rabbi Shimon derive that one who takes an oath for himself is liable in the case of the oath of testimony? He learns it from the case of Pikadon, because the core element of the core discussion in the Torah in connection with the oath of testimony is where I tell you, Stan, to testify for me. You say no, and I say, so swear to me, and you say amen, and therefore I have essentially said the oath, and all you did was say amen. So that's the description in the Torah. So how do I know that if you voluntarily say that I swear that I don't know any testimony, that you're also going to be liable? We learn it, according to Rabbi Shimon, from the case of Pikadon. So Pikadon Nami. Well, once we learn it and connect the two topics, so Pikadon Nami, we should learn in connection with the deposit, Bushba Mepiacherim Nigbar Me'edus. We should learn that also when it comes to somebody who's forced to swear and the person says amen, that we also should learn from the Gzeira Shava that when it comes to the deposit, that is considered a sufficiently valid oath. So umaychu mechucha. But what kind of mockery is that? Dilma Rabbi Shimon, but Kal v'chomer ma'asila. Maybe Rabbi Shimon learned it through a Kal v'chomer, meaning he learned the fact that that the swearing himself is going to be problematic in connection with oath of testimony from a Kal v'chomer, and not from a Pikadon. Meaning the point is that if in fact I'm going to be liable, if you say all the words and all I say is amen, well then certainly I'm going to be liable if I say all the words. So mepiacherim chayiv, mepiatzmo lo kol shekain, meaning again he should certainly be liable. So as a result, that's not a good mockery. Meaning the problem, there is no obvious problem with it, and so as a result, why would they mock the statement in Israel? Ella chucha amazing kishogi. No, so it must be that the mockery is based on the fact that we're treating a knowing sinner like a non-knowing sinner. So tikatani, because we have a brisa. Mala pikadon, when it comes to a deposit, shekaim lo asavo mushba kanishba, the Torah does not treat the person who is forced to swear like one who swears by himself, mezid b'shogig at kishogig, and it doesn't treat the knowing sinner like somebody who didn't know that they were doing something wrong and sinned. Meaning, if the person didn't realize that you gave him a deposit and just like forgot about it, we're not going to impose that same liability. So michti, let's take a look. Mezid gabi edus minale. How do we know that when it comes to that a person who sins intentionally with respect to an oath of testimony, that in fact that is going to be sufficient to be a problem? It's because the other topics that are talked about in the area all reference v'ne'elam. It was concealed. What's the kind of situation where it was concealed? That's where I forget. So hachinami loksi be'ne'elam. And when it comes to the oath of testimony, it doesn't use the word ne'elam. So that's how I know that intentional works. And so similarly, when it comes to the oath of deposit, it doesn't say the word that v'ne'elam, that it was concealed. And so that's how we know also when it comes to an oath of deposit that you're not going to that it has to be an intentional action. So Amar lahu Rav Huna umay chucha. So 1 second, what kind of mockery is that? Dilma mezid delav kishoge bepikadon. Maybe the point is that when it comes to a deposit, the oath of deposit, a knowing sinner is not liable to an offering just like an unknowing sinner. Mimi'ila Rabbi Shimon Gamarla, and Rabbi Shimon derives the lesson from this case of Me'ila, as Rashi says, Mimi'ila Gamar Ne'amar Kan Uma'ala Ma'al, that when it comes to the oath of the oath of deposit, it says ma'al, that he used something without permission. And similarly, when it comes to me'ilah from the Beis Hamikdash, it says ma'al. Namar lahalan kitim o ma'al. So the point is that we learn from one case to the other. And when it comes to me'ilah in the Beis Hamikdash, it has to be unintentional. So too here, it must be unintentional. So v'hainu chucha. But one second, that itself could be the mockery. So ad gomer me'ila nigmar la me'edus. But why learn it from the case of me'ila? Let's learn it from the oath of testimony. And just as the oath of testimony applies in both an intentional and an unintentional, or applies just in intentional situations, so too here. Mistabr me'ila havale lemel. I'm sorry, and it applies in both situations. So too here, in connection with the deposit, it should apply in both situations. So mistabr me'ila havale lemel. It makes more sense to learn from taking from the Beis Hamikdash. Shekain me'ila me'ila, because both of them use the term of me'ila. But adarabba, me'edus havalei me'elef. One second, maybe it makes more sense to learn it from the oath of testimony. Shekain techata mitechada. After all, we have Gzeira Shava using the word sin. So mistabra me'ila havalei me'elef. No, there are a bunch of reasons to learn it from me'ila. Why? Let's take a look at them. We're going to have 6. 1, shekain me'ila. First of all, it uses the term me'ila, so that's 1. 2, bakol, it applies to all people, unlike testimony, which doesn't apply to women, for example. Nene, in both me'ila and the oath of deposit, the person who's sinning is benefiting, is getting some benefit. He's taking something from the Beis Hamikdash, or he's taking something that doesn't belong to him. Bikavua, it's both subject to the regular chatas offering, not the karban ola v'yored. Chomesh, it's both times, it's both involved paying an extra 1/5 penalty. V'asham, and both are punishable with an asham offering. So that shows 6 reasons. Well, adarabba me'edus havalei me'ev. Well, I'll give you a bunch of reasons that we should learn it from the oath of testimony. Shekain chet, because it's a sin, meaning they both use the terminology of sin. Hedjot, and it applies to the property of a regular person, whereas the me'ila is the property of the Beis Hamikdash. B'shvua, and in both situations, there's an oath. With regular me'ila from stealing from the Beis Hamikdash, there's no oath involved. Taveh v'chafrei, and both involve making a claim against somebody and denying that claim. The Owen, and they both have the word O in connection with it, which doesn't exist by me'ila. Well, that's 5 reasons. And hanach nefishin. So bottom line, though, is that 6 is more than 5, so it makes more sense to learn it from me'ila. And so as a result, we learn that just as me'ila, only if you do it accidentally is it going to be problematic, and not if you do it in purpose. So too, when it comes to the oath of deposit, the treating, if you do it on purpose, is different than if you do it by accident. So umaychu, so ella maychucha. So what is this mockery? So kiyasa Rav Papa Rav Huna braid the Rav Yoshua mibei Rav Amri. So Rav Papa and Rav Huna said hainu chucha. Here's the problem. Mikti. Let's take a look. Rabbi Shimon Gzeira Shava Gamir. In the end, Rabbi Shimon uses a Gzeira Shava of Techata. Lamalei de Parach. Well, one second. Once he uses that, how could you possibly say Mala Pikadon Shekaim Lo Asabo Mushbo and Kanishba Mezid Kashogig? How can you not have that both of them are the questions on our Kal V'chomer? Because in the end, we are learning oath of testimony and oath of deposit one from the other. So they should all have the same law. And that's what's the problem is. But my chucha, once again, that doesn't work because Dilma Kaparach, maybe when he asked the question on the Kal V'chomer, Mikame to take him like Gzeira Shava. That was before he established the Gzeira Shava of Techata. So Basar to come like Zereshava, and once he set up the Zereshava, lo paruch, then you're right. Really, there would not be any questions. The low, 1 second, are you really saying that Rabbi Shimon, that even after the Zereshava, Rabbi Shimon wouldn't have a problem? Va'amar lahu Rava bar Itai l'Rabbanan. We have Rava bar Itai saying to the rabbis, Mantana, who's the Tana who taught the following? Shvuas hapikadon lo nitam zidona l'chapara. When it comes to an oath of deposit, if you knowingly swear, well, then it's not subject to the offering. So as a result, we see that that it's not, those two are not compared. Intentional and unintentional are not comparable. And who does Rava bar Itai say that is the author of that statement? Rabbi Shimon. That is Rabbi Shimon. So as a result, it's clear that he would have the problem of Mazid Kashogeg. So Dilma Mazid Kashogeg Parach. So you're right. So maybe he could ask just the question of Mazid Kashogeg to Gomer Lama Meila, because he learned Mazid Kashogeg, meaning that Mazid is not like a shogeg when it comes to the oath of deposit, because he learns from Meila, where Mazid is not like shogeg. Dahanach nefishin, because there are more reasons to tie those two together, as we saw a few moments ago. Aval mushba kanishba lo parach. But when it comes to the saying that the person who is forced to swear and doesn't swear, that's the situation where, as a result of the Gzeira Shava, now we're going to treat a person who swears by a pikadon. It doesn't make a difference whether he says the oath himself or whether he says it says just amen to somebody else saying the oath and encouraging him to say the oath. He's going to be liable in both situations. And so as a result, what is the mockery? The mockery is saying that your question about treating somebody who swears on their own and somebody who swears with an amen, that those two, that's going to be different between the two, that is not a good question, because in the end you have a Gzeira Shava. And so as a result, we've now found the mockery. And so now the Gemara asks, 1 second though, but once we have this connection, the Tedar Edus V'Tigmar Lamed Pikadon, but now let's go back in the other direction and let's learn the oath of testimony from the oath of deposit, that Mazid Delav Kashogeg, right? We have the fact, we know that when it comes to a deposit, Mazid is not like Shogeg. So why not? And we have the fact that that we learn oath, the oath of the testimony from the oath of deposit. So why not take the fact that we have when it comes to the oath of deposit, we treat a knowing sinner not like an unknowing sinner, not like a Mazid, not like a shogeg. So let's do the same thing. Ma pikadon shogeg ein Mazid lo. Just when it comes to deposit, an unknowing sinner is liable for an offering, but a Mazid, an intentional sinner, is not. So af edus. So too when it comes to testimony, shogeg in, mazid lo. Maybe we should say also the oath of testimony, if you do it unintentionally, so then you'll be liable, but not if you do it intentionally. So kihechi de yala pikadam and meila, just like we learned deposit from meila, because now we also have the Gzeira Shava. So let's do that. So no, as we turn to the top of Lamed Hey and Aleph, lahacha kasva rachmana le'edus. This is why the Torah specifically wrote the oath with respect to testimony, gabi shuas bitui, right next to the oath of an utterance, the oath that we studied last chapter. So the gabi tumas mikdash v'kadashav, and also next to the discussion of tuma of the mikdash and its holy things, because the bechula nemar behen benelam. When it came to those other items, it says benelam. That shows that it's only if you do it by accident that you're going to be liable to the offering. V'kan lo nemar benelam. But here, when it comes to the oath of testimony, it doesn't use the word benelam. And why does it not use the word benelam? L'chayav al hamezid kashogi. It's because it's telling us specifically that you are going to be liable for an intentional sin, just like an accidental sin, but just like an unwitting sin. And so as a result, that shows that when it comes to the oath of testimony, intentional is just like unwitting, but when it comes to the oath of pikadon, so then we're not going to treat those as the same. My apologies for not scrolling. That brings us to the next Mishnah, which identifies 5 cases when witnesses would not be liable for a false Shevuot ha'edut, but for that list, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Looking forward to continuing our learning together. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.